Hello, everybody. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Ryan, and welcome to Central Park. We're happy to continue bringing the park to you through in-person programming as well as our virtual programming, like today's weekly walk, which occurs every Wednesday at 12:30, as many of you probably already know. I want to thank you for joining us again and continuing to support us on these virtual and in-person programs. Today we have a fun little one that I'm especially excited for. It's titled Weekly Walk Balto's Big Adventure with me, Ryan, on today, December 14th, 2022. And one of the reasons we're taking Balto's Big Adventure right now is because we do see on December 17th, 1925, the Balto statue being dedicated here in Central Park. So on our walk today, we're going to talk a little bit about really what makes this statue so special and really what an amazing journey and adventure Balto and about another 150 sled dogs had to really make an incredible difference over in Alaska. But along the walk, we'll see a few other things. I do want to again thank you for joining us and supporting us here at the Central Park Conservancy, the nonprofit that's been caring for the park since 1980. Our mission being to preserve and celebrate Central Park as a sanctuary from the pace and pressures of city life, enhancing the enjoyment and well-being of all. Of course, we do love to have your support, both in person and on these virtual programs. Just because we're virtual doesn't mean that you can't still participate. We do encourage you to say hello using the chat feature, maybe share where you're joining us from or a favorite memory, whether it's related to Balto or not of Central Park. If you do have a question, please use the Q&A feature. And my colleagues, Jose, Desiree, and Carla are on the back end and can answer any questions that you might have. The last thing you'll see that pop up will be some visitor polls I'll launch throughout the walk today. And once everybody has voted in the polls, I'll share the results and I'll try to get those up for us. I do just want to note I am having a little trouble pulling up the transcripts today. I'll try to get that up for us, but might be a little bit before the transcripts start popping up. So as we do begin our walk, I just want to show you the route we're going to be taking, starting down at Grand Army Plaza and taking quite a walk before we eventually get to the main course of our walk today, which is, of course, the Balto statue that many of you are familiar with. But as we begin our walk, we get to see some beautiful little canines before we even make it to Central Park. As we're walking to begin our walk today, we run into a group of some of my favorite dogs to see around the park. The dogs we see here are poodles. I won't be able to remember all 6 of their names, but I do remember Sadie and Razzmatazz, 2 of my favorites. I always refer to these as the popcorn chicken dogs because when they're lying down, it's hard to distinguish them from pieces of popcorn chicken. But some of our favorite canines that visit the park. And of course, there's a lot that I won't have the ability to include on the walk, but we'll keep our eyes open for any living or statue dogs throughout the park today. And as we begin over on Grand Army Plaza at 59th and 5th Avenue, we're entering the park on a relatively overcast day, which is appropriate because Balto's Big Adventure did occur in the winter of the end of January into the February of 1925. So probably an overcast and much snowier day as opposed to what we're experiencing right now in New York. But as we begin to cross the street, we'll enter into the park. And one of the things that's most amazing about Balto's adventure that we're going to be talking about today is that this journey occurred over about 5.5 days. Speaking of things that are more temporary or in a short time frame, we do actually see a piece of art over here at Doris C. Friedman Plaza. The piece that we see as we start to walk across the street is a pretty interesting one. Coming a little bit closer, we can see a piece titled Ancestor by Bart E. Carr. Bart E. Carr created this piece, which helps to connect New Delhi with New York City. Not the best photos that you can see I've taken here, but a little detail shot helps just to show how this piece was inspired. It's actually based on a series that Bart E. Carr did, where she took old clay and ceramic statues that were broken or damaged and repurposed them to create a piece with brand new life. It's meant to look a little worn down and faded, beyond just, of course, the bad quality of my photo. But visiting this in person, you can see the detail firsthand, as well as read a little bit more about it in the plaque that resides just on the north side of the statue, diving into a lot more information than I'm sharing right here. But as we continue our adventure today, we'll start to make our way into Central Park, crossing the street across this East Side Drive, and eventually making our way down towards the pond. Enjoying, of course, whatever color we do still have that remains here. And as we make our way down the park a little bit more, we do pass by the Gapstow Bridge, as well as very appropriately, a four-legged friend that we can see here enjoying the park. As we do make our way through, of course, we'll keep our eyes open for any interesting features we might see along the way. And as we continue walking down, as we continue walking down a little bit, we can enjoy some of the very late blooming foliage. There's still plenty of color in the park, surprisingly, even though we're just a few days away from winter. So fall has really been holding on this season. As we continue walking down, though, a bit further up the path, we do see people lining up for an adventure in some form. The adventure these people are lining up to engage in is, of course, the activity of ice skating, one that's been quite an historic one throughout Central Park's history. Now, Central Park has played a role in many people's adventures, and in some cases, it's even helped to serve as the starting location for a very special life adventure that some people decide to take. Now, that venture that I'm referring to is marriage. As we walk up to the top of Woolman Rink overlooking the ice skating rink, we do see a very special moment unfolding before our eyes. As the rink was cleared for ice resurfacing, we do see one couple taking their time coming back, finding themselves alone on the ice. And in that moment, we witness this couple continuing their life adventure together, beginning a new chapter here in Central Park. This photo being just after he did get up from being down on one knee, but a very special moment, one that was met with plenty of applause over here on the spectator side of Woolman Rink. As we keep walking around, we're sure to see plenty of beautiful adventures occurring in the park, even if the weather isn't bright, sunny, and shiny. But as we continue walking, we're going to head briefly just to the west for a moment as we start to make our way through Drip Rock Arch. And actually, as we start to make our way through Drip Rock Arch, we can see another beautiful moment unfolding. Adventures of all sizes can be had here in Central Park. And here we witness a father dancing with his daughter to the music of a saxophone player sitting just below Drip Rock Arch, filling the air with a lot of holiday tunes and beautiful melodies coming from that brass instrument. As we continue walking further north, we do find ourselves in some late showing elm trees. And as we make our way up to this location, I did actually want to launch a poll for us. This first one is, how many bronze statues include dogs in Central Park? Now, I'm specifically referring to bronze statues. There is one or two stone replicas of a dog, but specifically here, bronze statues. So we'll let everybody vote in there. For some reason, I don't know why choice 5 is on there. I must have forgotten to take that away. But voting in that, I'll end the poll in just a moment. And as we start to make our way up the path a little bit more, we can enjoy some of the beautiful elm trees again that are having a late foliage display over here. A nice golden yellow color and shimmer added to this overcast day. And nestled between the trees over here, we can find another interesting sight. Now, before we come up to this one, I will share that poll result that I just launched. And we can see that just about, I think a lot of people are on the right track. We do have about 48 people going for 1, 31 people going for 2, 64 for 3, and 26 for 4. So the correct answer there is actually 3. And we're going to see all 3 bronze statues that include dogs on our walk today. In fact, as we make our way in between these elm trees just in front of us, we can see one of those dog statues. Well, I guess it's not centered around the dog like Balto is, but the dog is also certainly one of the items that sticks out most to me in this piece. The statue we see here is titled the Indian Hunter, and it's a statue sculpted by John Quincy Adams Ward, an American sculptor who would actually be the first American to have a piece, or first American sculptor to have their piece actually displayed here in Central Park. Its likeness is based on members of the Dakota and Lakota tribes, which inhabited the area of present-day North and South Dakota. But the reason we find ourselves stopping at this statue is because of its additional subject, of course, that we can see here. A dog. Coming a little bit closer, we can see some of the detail of this canine. Although the timing and causes of domestication of dogs are uncertain, genetic evidence suggests that dogs split from their wolf ancestors between 27,000 to 40,000 years ago. In fact, the oldest known dog burial is actually from about 14,200 years ago, suggesting that dogs were firmly utilized as pets and possibly even members of the family by then. Looking a little bit closer, though, at this piece, we can see some of my favorite detailing. The mane of this dog, all those beautiful curly locks, which beautifully detail this dog, but also add a little bit of an almost intimidating appearance to it. Little intimidating, but certainly looking quite fluffy over here. Incredible detail for a piece that was created in 1869. Well, actually dedicated here in 1869, but being sculpted just a few years prior to that. Another amazing feature, I think, is along the base of this statue. The statue of John Quincy Adams Ward's most iconic and popular piece is really detailed. And again, looking over the whole piece, we can see detail all around, even on the foot of the statue. The paws of the dog, as well as the human's foot behind it, have wonderful detail. We can see the dog's nails and all 5 of the dog's toes. You might notice the 5th toe, which is called a dew claw, located just on the kind of mid-left of this photo, that little almost ankle spotted toe over there. Basically the equivalent of a thumb for a dog, but obviously with much less functionality. But again, amazing detail all around this piece, and a piece that people often don't really give full credit to. Artwork featuring dogs is no new thing. I was visiting the Museum of the Dog in Midtown Manhattan, a favorite museum of mine. One can see some incredible artworks inspired by dogs, as well as learn how breeds of dogs actually played a helpful role in helping to identify some of the time periods and regions in which pieces that were previously undated and unknown were able to be determined. The piece that we see pictured here is not one from the Museum of the Dog, but rather a favorite piece that I saw recently on a visit to the Cleveland Museum of Art. I was lucky enough to visit and see this beautiful piece titled "Sitting Dog Scratching Himself." It dates back over 300 years before the creation of Central Park or any of the statues of dogs that we're going to be seeing today. And it also highlights the love of dogs that has existed for centuries and centuries. As we continue and snap back to Central Park, we can already see where we're going to be visiting next. Maybe if you visited this lower section of the mall before, you may have visited Literary Walk. Now, this location gets its name from the poets who were immortalized in statues around here. But we're not going to see a poet, we're rather going to see a dog. Now, looking just to the east, we can see a statue of Scottish poet Walter Scott. What many visitors to the park don't realize is Scott is not alone. Just along the northern side, we can see him joined by one of the largest dog breeds to exist. In terms of maybe height and length, probably not as much bulkiness, but this is the appropriately named Scottish Deerhound. You may have guessed that this dog originates in Scotland, and it was once bred to hunt deer, specifically red deer that can be found over in Scotland in those areas. It's thought to have a close historical relation to the Irish Wolfhound, a dog that looks very similar and from a similar area. And actually, the foundation of the modern Irish Wolfhound breed is primarily that of Scottish Deerhound, but a really amazing dog that we can see here. The locks of this dog breed are really amazing. Pulling up a picture, you can see a Scottish Deerhound a little bit closer. Again, just beautiful kind of rough coated knots on this dog, but a very, very tall and commanding dog. You can imagine a group of these trying to hunt some deer. But as we move a little bit further on, we can also just note again, the rough coat on this dog that would help keep them warm in those kind of high, hilly Scottish Highland Glen areas. This piece that we see here is also sculpted by a Scottish sculptor named John Steele. It would be dedicated in 1872, coming about 3 years after the Indian hunter piece we just saw. As we are gazing upon this piece, I do notice someone appropriately hanging out in the background over there. If we look to the bottom kind of left of this photo, we might be able to notice an appropriate spectator just in the background. A nice little four-legged friend, yet another that we can see enjoying Central Park in this area. As we, it's not a Scottish Deerhound, but still a dog that we'll take. As we continue walking down, we can say hello to this fluffy park visitor before we start making our way a little bit south. Now, as we continue down into the park, we are going to just kind of backtrack a little bit before we get to Balto. And that's because I do want to show you just a few things before we actually see the piece de resistance of today's walk, which is of course the Balto statue. So as we do start to make our way down a little bit, we'll actually walk along the side of We'll walk along the side of Woolman Rink, eventually making our way down to Inscope Arch. And as we pass through Inscope Arch a little bit, we can get a little bit of that tunnel vision I like to get as we walk through a lot of these areas. And we'll find ourselves coming a little bit closer out to the mouth of the Central Park Zoo. As we enter in the zoo on the southern section, there is a few features that seldom are overlooked, but ones that I wanted to highlight on the walk today. Right near the Dancing Crane Cafe, we can find an appropriately named statue, one that probably led to the Dancing Crane Cafe being named the Dancing Crane Cafe. What we see here is the dancing goat statue. This whimsical piece is beloved, but hidden. The gem that sits on the southern entrance of the zoo, one that not a lot of people get to visit. But as we pay a stop here, we can enjoy the beauty of this piece. One of my favorite details being the fountain base along the bottom. This being sculpted by Frederick Roth, it would be unveiled during the 1934 reopening of the Central Park Zoo. Along the base of this piece, we do see these ducklings, which during the warmer months, spew out water from their mouths, filling the fountain below. Beautiful ornate detail in these tiny little ducklings. The ducks are certainly a beloved feature with their intricate detail. And again, just on such a small bronze scale, they're really impressive. I always get a little nervous though for this duck right here in front, who looks like he's getting a little too close to the goat's foot. I hope he doesn't get stepped on, especially since this goat does not look too coordinated, but rather a little bit clumsy, as we can see here. The idea of a dancing goat may seem like a very creative new idea, but surprisingly it wasn't. Actually, as we look into the past, we can find many different types of ads utilizing dancing goats. Dancing goats have been around for a while and have been used for a lot of advertisements throughout the 19th century, even earlier than that. Probably most famous by Bach beer. We can see two examples of Bach beer ads here featuring dancing goats. The one on the left coming from 1874, while the one on the right is from 1883. Both over 50 years older than Frederick Roth's dancing goat statue that we just saw. Now, actually, the legend of dancing goats really goes back much, much earlier than the 19th century. So legend has it that coffee beans were first discovered by monks who noticed their goats became frisky and began to dance after eating a certain berry. The place being Ethiopia, the Ethiopian highlands, where coffee trees are still found to this day and have been historically. Ethiopia is actually said to be the birthplace of coffee, discovered over 2,000 years ago. But we can see somehow how this legend and story would eventually turn into advertisements from coffee to, of course, beer, as we can see here. Now, as we do leave behind these 19th century Bach beer ads, we can continue walking our way north. Enough about goats. We'll keep adventuring and bring our attention back to hopefully dogs in just a little bit. But for now, we'll continue walking up. Before we do, though, I did notice something that caught my eye walking by. Of course, a lot of colors still available in the park. And even in these shrubbier patches of different types of herbaceous plants, we can still find a lot of interesting discoveries. Are those? No, they can't be. But they are. Those are peppers. Who would have guessed there's peppers growing in front of the Central Park Zoo? I certainly didn't. But coming over to this area, we can see some very appropriately, almost just like a golden orange ember of these peppers shooting up. Now, I did not take any of these to try. They're probably edible, but of course, we never recommend picking any flowers or plants from Central Park or eating anything that you might find here. But of course, the color is enough to keep us warm on this otherwise chilly day. As we start making our way down, we can see a very blurry and out of focus photo that I took right near the northern exit of the zoo. And as we make our way up to this area, we can visit one last statue over here. We have to pay a visit to Honey Bear, another piece sculpted by Frederick Roth. Now, you may be wondering why we're seeing so many Frederick Roth pieces, and that's because Balto happens to be sculpted by Frederick Roth. Before we get to that, we'll take a little bit closer of a look at this Honey Bear statue. Now, covered up a little bit more by some of the shrubs growing around it, it can be a little bit more difficult to see than the dancing goat, but this feature also has some intricate little water features along the base of it, these being frogs. But for some reason, I don't feel as worried about these frogs getting stepped on as I do the ducklings. As we look at this bear, though, we can see again some nice, interesting detail, like a bear licking honey from a beehive. This animal looks like he's having a lovely time, and I do love the addition of the tongue sticking out on both the goat and the bear that we have over here, adding a little bit of whimsy to this piece. Now, Frederick Roth, beyond just sculpting some of these more whimsical or cartoony-like pieces, we do see him sculpting a lot of incredible animal sculpts. Frederick Roth actually happens to be the most represented artist in Central Park. We can actually see a photo of him here, sculpting a lion that would be a 25th anniversary gift given to Columbia University by the graduating class of 1899. This photo depicts the sculpting process that was occurring around 1923, leading up to this gift's donation. As we come back to present time, we'll see another photo of Frederick Roth in just a little bit. But for now, we're going to continue up to the final leg of our journey, coming to a statue you are all very, very familiar with. And as we make our way through the Dean, a landscape that gets its name Dean, simply from the word that means valley. So we'll walk through this small valley, enjoying the sights along the way, like appropriately, more canine acquaintances hanging very close by Balto. As we continue making our way just up the path, though, we can trade off these living canines for our favorite bronze canine. A crowd even already starting to gather on this overcast rainy day to appreciate Balto. As we make our way just a few more steps up the path, we come to a good boy that needs no introduction, but we'll give him one anyway. It's Balto. Even if you don't like Huskies, it's hard not to respect the work this Siberian Husky, along with about 150 other sled dogs, accomplished in 1925. Known as the Great Sarum Run to Nome, or the 1925 Sarum Run, our story begins in a small town in Alaska known as Nome. As we grab a different view of Balto, an unfortunate diphtheria outbreak occurred in the village, which is near the Arctic Circle. However, despite its location, it was still the largest town in northern Alaska during 1925. Because a supply of anti-serum or antitoxin for diphtheria wasn't able to be replenished before winter, the town of Nome was without diphtheria antitoxin. Planes weren't able to fly in due to the harsh winter climate. The only way to get the antitoxin was to send it using man's best friend. Dogs, along with mushers, of course, would help to deliver this antitoxin in an incredible journey. Now, Balto may be the only specific dog figure immortalized in Central Park in a three-dimensional bronze statue, but it's important to remember he was not the only one responsible for this great feat, as we can see a few other dogs immortalized on the plaque up here as well. The plaque here commemorates all of the sled dogs who helped complete this journey. Roughly about 150 sled dogs and their mushers relayed antitoxin across 674 miles in just 5.5 days to save the town of Nome, as well as some of the surrounding communities. We do see Balto being on the sled dog team that would complete the final leg of this journey. But many others also deserve credit for their incredible efforts. One that I would like to highlight, a dog that certainly demands our respect, is Togo. Now, some of you may have heard of Togo before. The statue we see here is one that is not in Central Park, but rather a statue that exists in Seward Park in Lower Manhattan. Now, William H. Seward, appropriate connection here, I promise. William H. Seward, for whom this park is named, Seward Park, was the Secretary of State under Abraham Lincoln. He is actually the one who purchased Alaska from Russia in 1867 for $7 million. At that time, it was called Seward's Folly by the press and by other newspapers, but it would soon prove to be a pretty wise investment. Many mushers today consider Balto to be the backup dog, because musher Leonard Sapalia and his team, led by Togo, actually covered the longest and most hazardous conditions and route on this entire journey. They covered upwards of 260 miles to sometimes it's said to be over 300 miles, in comparison to Balto's team, which only ran about 55 miles. So we do owe Togo a big deal of respect for his team, traveling over 300 miles, completing almost half of the overall journey just by themselves. A really amazing piece that we can see dedicated down here in 2001 in Seward Park. But anyway, let's snap back to Balto. Just because Balto and his team didn't complete as much as Togo doesn't mean we don't love him all the same. And it's hard to break the spirit of a dog, as we can see here with Balto looking as chipper as ever. Whether rain or maybe whether snow even. I'm sure Balto looks a little bit more at home in the photo that we can see here. And if we zoom in, we can see one of my favorite shots I think I've ever taken in Central Park, which is this beautiful close-up of Balto with just the right amount of snow on his head. This is how I like to envision Balto. And the photo that we see here is actually coming from a past weekly walk. Although it's not cold enough for the rain to turn to snow just yet, just around the corner, this is probably what we can expect seeing. These photos are from the Dean Weekly Walk, which occurred on February 17th, 2021. Those who are interested in watching it can find it on our Central Park Conservancy YouTube channel under our Weekly Walks playlist, or my colleagues will share the link for that specific weekly walk in the chat. So if you do want to watch another Dean Weekly Walk involving some Balto later, we'll drop that in the chat for you. But as we snap back to modern time, we can climb up on top of Balto, give him a few pets, as well as we enjoy some of the detailing on the statue, like that signature fluffy tail that is characteristic of Huskies. We can also note the lesser detail in parts of Balto's fur in comparison to other dog statues we saw earlier. And one of the reasons that this statue is devoid of some of those fine hairlines and details is because of the overwhelming amount of love this statue receives. Looking at this piece, we can actually see where Balto gets the most pets or potentially even rides. As you can see, his head is very shiny bronze compared to some of the other areas that are less touched. This is coming from natural hand polishing, as our palm oils help to smoothen out and glisten and shimmer this statue a little bit. So any of those areas you see brighter gold is certainly coming from a lot of this just human interaction. But as you explore Balto, you can see this a lot easier up close and in person. Here in the United States, it's interesting to think about, especially after bronze artwork shifted from pedestal displays to more accessible interactive forms, we see people touching statues more commonly, something you don't often see in a lot of other countries. So keep an eye out the next time you're visiting a statue in the USA. You may easily be able to spot everyone's favorite spot to touch. Here we can certainly see a nice confident pose of Balto and where he's gotten the most love. But looking at an historic photo of Frederick Roth, we can actually see Frederick Roth working on an early model for Balto. You might notice the pose we see here looking very different than the statue that ultimately was decided upon. We can also note another feature that's almost entirely abandoned, that feature being the pedestal. The pedestal of this piece is really interesting. It took on a much more fitting natural position as it sits on top of a cropping of Manhattan schist. This statue also allows for the statue to not really look like a formal piece, but rather a dog standing proud on top of a mountain, keeping watch over, as well as being a statue that's more accessible and interactive rather than something that's on a very tall pedestal. Now, as we continue a little bit, I do want to just show the really amazing attachment of this, because it's hard to believe the pedestal even exists at all. But there is a separate piece of schist that this statue was mounted to and then attached to the rock. But unless you come really close, it's very difficult to be able to tell the difference. I do want to just share a poll real quick. And the poll I want to share is if you've ever seen the real Balto. And I'll explain where the real Balto is in just a moment. This, again, specifically being the real-life taxidermied Balto, not the bronze statue that we see here. So let everybody vote in that for just a moment as we continue to the last little slide or two we have. But as we jump back into history, we can see this piece really taking on new life. There's one other thing that makes this piece really unique. So we do see Balto's big adventure occurring really between about late January to February of 1925, with the journey ending around February 2nd. What's really amazing about this piece, though, is this happens to be the only statue or figure here in Central Park that is immortalized in a commemorative bronze statue that was actually present during the statue's unveiling. So out of all those other real humans we have in the park, none of them were there during their statue's unveiling. Balto happens to be the only figure who was actually present while the statue was dedicated on December 17th, 1925. So we're just 3 days away from that anniversary. The amazing run that these dogs would complete would occur again at the end of January and be finished by February 2nd of 1925, with Balto's team arriving into Nome that morning at about 6:30, with the antitoxin and serum actually thawed out and ready to go by noon of that day, saving countless people. We do see Balto here with his musher Gunnar Kassan during the statue's unveiling on December 17th, 1925. We're coming up on the 97th anniversary of Balto's big adventure. Now, if you ever wanted to see Balto yourself, you do have the opportunity to. As you can see, some of our team here visiting Balto in the fur. Balto is taxidermied over at the Cleveland Museum of Natural History. So I'll share actually those poll results, and it looks like majority of us probably haven't seen Balto before, but about 10% of us have. Depending whether you like to see Balto taxidermied, which we can see a better shot of in this picture I'm pulling up, or in person, or rather at the bronze statue we have in the park, you can notice some differences, that kind of brown and white color as opposed to what we usually see in photos looking like more of a black color. Also, Balto looking a little bit smaller here, but probably because typically taxidermied animals do kind of shrink a little bit. Of course, not too many people are really excited to see a stuffed Balto, so that's why a lot of people do prefer coming and enjoying the statue that we have here in Central Park. Whether you prefer to see Balto in the fur or in the bronze, his ageless memorial here in Central Park is always keeping a watchful eye on us, ready to spring into action like the good boy he was and like he will always be. As we do reach the end of our walk, we did take a big adventure today to pay respects to Balto and see a few of the features that were sculpted by Frederick Roth, who also would go on to sculpt, of course, his most famous statue, Balto, which we can find in this lower section of Central Park, just north of the Central Park Zoo. So certainly come pay Balto a visit, maybe visit him on December 17th and celebrate that 97th anniversary in person. And of course, whether you want to learn about Balto or plenty of other features in the park, there are a bunch of upcoming programs like our specialty programs, new seasonal offerings that are only going to be occurring for a few times each month. In December, you can see our Winter Wonderland tour, a new tour we're launching, one that will involve not only learning some new information, but also include a hot beverage for you to enjoy on what will probably be a relatively cold day. As we do approach winter, of course, chilly weather and snow is on the horizon. So certainly come to the park and experience it during a very new season and a very different type of perspective. I do want to thank you again for joining these programs. You can find links for this upcoming Winter Wonderland program in the chat box, or check our website under our tours page to see all of the offerings that we do have available. But as we do come to the end of our walk over here, I will leave this room open for just a little bit longer in case there are any last minute questions we didn't have the opportunity to get to. But I do want to thank you again for your support here at the Central Park Conservancy and encourage you to keep coming on both virtual as well as in-person tours so we can share more information than we're able to squeeze into this virtual tour. So please come into the park and say hello to us, but I will leave this room open for a few more minutes, but otherwise we're going to see you next week, next Wednesday at 12:30. So thank you everybody from all of us here at Central Park. Stay safe, be well, and we'll see you soon.